Hi, I'm Justin Mormon.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode, the Great IEP Debate. I can't tell you enough how nervous Katie is about this episode. I have no idea why.
All the things we talk about, this is the one.
Somehow we have started talking about this episode at two different occasions, and both times she kind of freaked out. I just want everybody to know that, and let's try to fun game for you, drinking game out there for you. You can clock every time Katie feels uncomfortable. And first one is right now. So let's get started. Hey, before we jump in, real quick, we jump in, hey, if you could leave a review, that'd be great. If you give us a 5-star review, that'd be great. Just helps us keep the conversation going, helps other people to be able to find the podcast, and that's what hopefully everybody out there wants. So do that. Great IEP debate. Let's jump in. How about that?
It sounds great.
What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say I appreciate you, with all that context of how maybe Katie's feeling about this. I appreciate you inviting me on to this one.
Yeah, that's specifically why I was like, we need to have you.
Josh is joining us as a mediator between Justin and I for this episode, so that's your sole purpose.
Katie, do you want to kick us off so that you have more control over things? Does that make you feel better?
I actually do.
Okay,
so let me go ahead and do that. Okay. Well, as intervention specialists for...
I disagree.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
There it goes.
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. No, Justin did not want to share a mic with me today either. So this is where we're at right now. As intervention specialists, we have more experience than desired in the craft of individual education plans, otherwise known as IEPs. Much of the IEPs are driven by state mandates, standards, and data metrics. So the debate is how we continue to individualize these documents regarding behavior.
And maybe I'll give an explanation of why I even came up with this. Episode. Is that okay? So we had a listener reach out who, when we talked about it was the 10 educational
top research.
Yeah, thanks. When we did that episode, there was an article that was about how artificial intelligence, if kids are using it to write papers, they won't remember things as well. They don't learn hardly anything.
Yep.
Right? Then one of the later articles was how intervention specialists could use artificial intelligence to help write IEPs. Mm-hmm. And so the question was, does that mean that the intervention specialists wouldn't really remember what they're putting in the IEPs very well? Mm-hmm. Or, and this is where I thought the bigger thing was, or is it just that they matter so little that it doesn't matter if they really remember what's in the IEP or not? Or if it's that personalized, because it's not that personalized. And so I thought that was actually a really good question. We should talk about IEPs. It's all three of us have plenty of experience with them. And so let's kind of delve into that, right? So really the idea to start us off is how do we customize IEPs? Because the reality is there is a ton of stuff that has to be kind of, again, mandated or that has to be in there to the point that when I first started out, at least, IEPs didn't have, we didn't break them down into sections in the profile section. We didn't break any of that down. I was just supposed to I just had this massive narrative that I wrote.
Right.
And then, then as I went through my career, people were like, actually the state says you have to have this. The state says you have to have this. The best way to remember that is to start putting kind of headlines, I guess, for lack of a better
headings.
Yeah, headings. Thanks. Yeah. There you go. That's better than headlines. Extra. So headings. And so then we had to fill out those. But with every step of making sure that we're compliant, it is that much more likely that it's not necessarily not individualized, but not very personal. Mm-hmm. I guess that's where I land with it. It doesn't. Sometimes people can write them, make sure that they're very compliant. I feel like I can't look at you because I have to turn this way and I won't be talking to the mic.
Maybe this is for the better.
Maybe it's for the best. If you could just tell me how mad she is. So
7.
Yes, it's a 7. That's her baseline maybe for this whole episode. So they can be very compliant. Yeah. We can be hitting all the marks, but you could almost read through some IEPs, I think, and you guys have probably read more IEPs from other people over the course of your careers.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Josh and I both were former coordinators, so we read other people's IEPs than ourselves all the time for our jobs. Yeah.
Are you just saying that now so that it feels like I have less say or less knowledge?
But I would say that's an accurate statement.
There were a couple years where I was reading a freaking ton of IEPs for people. But the bottom line is, I think you could write it, hit all the marks, have individualized data, and still not have it sound very personal at all.
Right.
And so how do we, I guess the question is, how do we kind of customize IEPs currently? How do we keep them personal? Things like that.
Yeah, and I think some of the work that I was a part of the last couple of years is a committee really making sure that the IEPs that we're writing that they were compliant, right? But there was always the discussion about compliance, but then also best practice. So we may, as a group, review an ETR evaluation team report or an IEP and go, yeah, well, it's compliant, but is it best practice? Is it a document that if you were to give to a new team member, it would give them useful information to guide the student's progress over the next year or however long that IEP is good for? So that, these are things that we have talked about as the compliance versus best practices or what's going to be the most effective IEP.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it is everything in our world here in Ohio, our evaluations drive what the IEP is, or what we as a team have to work on for that particular student. And those evaluations are done every 3 years. There's a lot of changes that can happen, and it being data driven, making sure that you're getting current data. Makes it more individualized to the student, along with the skills that need to be worked on. But that's kind of the compliance piece of it, right?
Yeah.
So how do you make it more personal?
Yeah, I wrote down some sections that I thought were opportunities. Some of them are just check yes or no, and boxes that it's not really a question to even discuss today because it's just this is what's allowed.
It is.
That's just what's not allowed. But here's the sections that you can personalize,
and that's going to be different. Maybe that's what you're going to say. Depending on where you're listening from, I'm sure states have different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Requirements.
I read the most. And no offense to anybody that lives out in Las Vegas, but I read the wildest IEP from Las Vegas.
Nevada,
I was like, I don't even understand how to even read this thing.
Yeah.
It was the format. It was a
That's
crazy
pretty wild,
structure
really, to think about.
It didn't make. I would like to say Ohio does a nice job of making it very clean and organized, and that's what we're used to.
Right.
But I feel like anybody could pick it up and understand the format and the guidance of it. But yeah, as we've seen out of state ones, I'm like, what are they doing over in the state over here? I don't even understand that. So the first thing we're going to look at is the profile, which is the most important part of the IEP. If you're going to read any parts, which I think we should say the most important part of customizing IEPs is reading the IEP.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how many times people receive kids and they'll say, well, I didn't know they did that, or I didn't. Like, did you read the IEP? Because I was in there.
Yep.
Like, I think people get caught up in filling out the data part and like into spreadsheets or organizing just to connect services really quick. But then if they're not spending the time to actually read the holistic IEP, you know what I mean?
And if you're a team member on that student's IEP team, you need to make sure that you're fluent in what the IEP says.
Yes.
Just because you're not a special education teacher.
The paraprofessional, the therapist, the principal, the coordinators, the integrated arts staff, right? Like, people need to know what the kids' actual needs are. Spend a lot of time. It's frustrating as the intervention specialist, spend a lot of time writing it, and then you're like, well, nobody read it.
Yep.
So here's how the profile, you should be putting strengths and needs in that section. That's a prime opportunity to really talk through what the kids' preferences are, and those things should always be included in the IEP as part of the narrative story of who the kid is.
Yep.
And then we're also looking at, like, the ETR information also goes in the profile, and then from a trauma-informed lens, we should also be adding in any FBA, trauma-informed FBA, or BIP.Data information should also be going into that profile section to give a need, like looking at universal needs or lagging skills should be included in there. That's a good way to summarize the kids' documents all together in that profile section. I also put present levels. As much as those have to be standards and data driven, there is an opportunity to customize what the kid's doing and things that have worked for the kid for that specific next step goal
Yep.
that should be progressions aligned. And so whether it's progressions aligned in regulation, we're going from co-regulation to self-regulation, those things should all be progression aligned in terms of the neuroscience piece. And then the goal writing should be customized for the kid. It should be tailored to what their needs are based upon all that data we talked about in the profile, their current baseline through the present level. The goal should be customized. And then the accommodations, I don't know how many times we see it's a copy and paste all for every kid. Those accommodations should really be customized to that student, actually what they need in the classrooms, but also have to be state compliant, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to look at your state's testing manual or accessibility manual, and you're going to see what are universal accommodations that all kids get.
Yep.
The state guidance for us is to go ahead and include those in the IEP.
Yep.
But you also want to look at what are accommodations or accessibility things that I should also add in for the students that's going to build up, independence or increase their independence in the everyday classroom. So those are like the 4 sections that I came up with that really should be customized for every kid.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I agree. I don't know why you thought I was going to be so adversarial during this whole podcast. But
she's at an 8.
It's good to know. It's a scale go up
Yeah.
to? What's it? Is it out of 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's at an 8.
It's out of 8. Yeah, it's out of 8. No, I think that, again, like, there's obviously the data, the metrics, the things that have to be included. There's a ton in the IEP that any given IEP that has to just be there, and there's a ton of it that's just the checklist, just the yes or no, just the this is pretty straightforward, and only so. I mean, it's specific to the kid, but there's only a couple ways you can really go with it. I think that really making sure that the actual data is right and relevant is important, and I think that's important. It's going to be. Give me a heads up on this. I think it's important with the academic goals a lot as well, because with the I know. I said the one thing. But I think it's really important with the academic goals, because what we sometimes see, this is why regulation is so important to me, why it's so important to figure out how kids can get regulated, stay regulated, and we can get the best out of them in any given situation is one of the reasons why it's so important. When you're getting ready to write an IEP, there have been plenty of times, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, or you're looking through an ETR, right? There can be plenty of times where it's like, this is the information we have. However, it didn't seem like the kid was able to give their best effort, or however, they refused to do a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, so really, we don't know. Like, we're still working through, and we're like, we actually still don't know what the kid's capable of, because really, we were still dealing with the fact that they just were, dysregulated in some way, and either refusing or, tearing up a paper or whatever it is. Super important to actually gather accurate information. Otherwise, the information you're putting in the IEP, you might also be saying like, well, this is their score, but we actually think they could do way better. And so that's why we're not going to maybe add this kind of goal right now. But it solves so many problems if you can get the actual best out of a kid that you think you can, that you think they're capable of, and get a good representation. But that all starts with keeping a kid regulated and putting them in a good spot to be able to actually get the information.
So what I hear you saying is that we should be writing IEPs based upon what a kid can do and work off there, instead of putting a bunch of stuff in what they can't do.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's really what you basically just said, is that they can't do this, we don't have a baseline for this, but we should be able to go back and say this is what they can do.
Yeah.
And I think where a lot of times we think of an IEP is you mentioned strengths and needs for the profile, where we spend a lot of focus on the needs, but in reality, understanding what the student's strengths are should be able to guide how you're going to be instructing and supporting the student to then raise up those needs. So they work hand in hand, but understanding student strengths as opposed to just focusing on where those deficits are.
I think we come with a delay sometimes. It's because sometimes we don't do a great job in teacher colleges or professionally updating people on developmental progressions of kids. And coming back to trauma-informed work, all this neuroscience stuff, especially when we write IEPs for behavior, I just don't think people know enough to even know what the next right steps are or what the next progression of things are. There's just a lot of professional development needs to be had there to be able to write the correct present level, the correct profile to select the right goal. So I think the absence of, not from neglect, but just lack of knowledge to do that is part of the issue we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think I think that writing goals that are either social emotional goals or behavior goals, whatever, however your district, however your state, whatever kind of says those need to be labeled. When it comes to behavior, really, I think those are the ones that are the toughest sometimes for people to write, because with academic goals, there's a lot of times a pretty clear cut, like, what's the next step, This kid doesn't know how to read very well. Like, we're gonna do something that's the next step in reading. They're not great at, they're behind in multiplication, and they should be able to multiply better. And that's an easy thing to know how to attack next. And so I think that makes it hard for those kind of behavioral goals, as SEL goals, or however they're labeled, to be worked through. So to me, and Katie, you touched on this, I think the profile is kind of the most solid place to give an overall picture of the student. Obviously, again, for us in Ohio, there's a lot of categories or a lot of boxes that need to be checked during that profile. I mean, just a ton. And it's kind of the bulkiest part usually of the IEP is that. But I think, Josh, to your point, the number of times that people just pick up and flip straight to the goals.
Yep.
And skip over the profile and are like, well, I just need to know what the goals are because that's what I'm in charge of tracking. But my gosh, you miss a lot. Katie, to your point, I think there's so much that can be said, whether it is behaviorally or academically. I know I keep saying academic, and that's your favorite for this podcast or this episode. But I think actually, what you said earlier is exactly right. Like, you have the chance to start painting a narrative of what that kid is capable of, what has worked, what hasn't worked. You can have an IEP that has 0 behavioral needs, but you really outline, like, what have we been doing? Because in the goals section, there's probably not as much of a chance to do that. And so you can start really giving whoever's working with this student next, let's say they move to Nevada instead.
They'll be grateful to get our IEP.
Oh, yeah.
Those people in Nevada will be like, maybe we should write them like this. No, every listener we ever had in Nevada is mad at us now. But
yeah.
And I'm sure there's plenty. So, but I think that they could go somewhere else and they could start saying, oh, like, I don't even need to try X, Y, and Z, because I can already see that kid's capable of it. Because it's spelled out in here. Or I can see that they are struggling in this area. Yeah, the goal is this thing, but they kind of struggle with, like, this approach in general. Or, hey, they get the best academic work out of this kid when I've already done these 3 things first. Mm-hmm. And so they're not like a huge behavior problem or anything. They don't have that kind of goal in their IEP, but I can actually put them in the best spot to learn and to be taught when I do these things first. It's those things that I think if we get too prescriptive in just making sure we're checking the boxes, it becomes way less personal. And then all of a sudden, we're putting a kid and staff members in a spot where they potentially don't know what to do that's going to help that student best, or they're having to try to reinvent the wheel when somebody else already invented it.
Yeah, and time, like, we don't have a lot of time with these students that are at risk when it comes to behaviors to spend trying to refigure out things that already work. Yeah. So if you have that blueprint and you have data that says these are strategies, combination of lots of different strategies that work with the student, then be as detailed as you can. And it's all time sensitive too, because you look at the students that you work with the beginning of, let's say, 4th grade, where historically they're new to you. Yeah. Then from the time that they leave at the end of 5th grade, there are so many different changes. From the time they leave 4th grade and go to 5th grade. Yeah. And in the district that you all work at, they go to middle school in 6th grade. You did a really good job of creating this narrative with very organized tips and tricks and strategies to best support things that you have already done with the student to find success, to communicate all of those things to the team that's going to be receiving them at the new building. And that should, they should be able to hit the ground running from the first day of school with all those strategies. Make sure that those things are set up. Obviously, environments and schools are different, but if they have that template, that blueprint for how to better support that student, and that's something that we would go to at the end of that year, even though we weren't required to. But when we were going to transition a student, we're going to meet before the end of that school year, before they go off to the middle school, and we're going to get the most up-to-date strategies and tools that you're using that we found success. So that team has that toolbox.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't solve every problem, right?
No,
But because
no.
it's a different place, just like if a kid moves. But the hope is, to your point, I think you expedite that process, right? And it really makes it a little bit better. All right, so what are the barriers then that we come across when we are trying to make something more customized as far as an IEP goes?
Yeah, I listed the state mandates certainly are a barrier. There's a lot of requirements, especially with reading. In our state, there is an expectation of minutes, and then same with math will be, added in there. So there are some mandates of just like, this is just what has to be, and has to be your approach when you're teaching this specific thing. So barrier right there. There's sometimes a call for district uniformity that our IEPs all look the same or feel the same. But that does put some restrictions on the individualized part of it at times.
Sure.
Team members' input, having people on different pages of what they want to see in the IEP or they feel like is important information. Of course, you have the case manager that's actually going to be the primary writer, but you certainly have other people writing into that IEP. They're on the team. This is my biggest one that we talk about a lot is plans on plans on plans. With good intentions, we overwork behavior planning and make it complex work with the needed state documentation, of course, but kids often have behavior plans, IEP goals, FBA, crisis plans. Mm-hmm. How do we implement this all and just can we get to the point where we can consolidate it into one document where it's being serviced through the IEP?
Right.
But some kids have multiple plans, and then it just gets so complicated at time. For students with behavior, I would say the over prioritization of academics. Not that we don't put academics on the IEP, but it becomes the primary focus when really you have to regulate before you educate.
Yep.
So sometimes we as a team need to sit down and decide, do we want to even address these goals, and why would we leave these goals off the IEP currently?
Yeah.
It might be because we've got to get the behavior done first. So we can amend the IEP if we can get the behavior regulated and then add some of the academic stuff on. So I think that some of those discussions don't happen, and they should.
Well, I think that's a good, not to interrupt what you were going through, but I think that's a really good point is oftentimes a student may have markers academically, behaviorally with a pretty substantial amount of needs gaps compared to their typical peers, and we think we have to do everything all at once. But in reality, you need to prioritize what is most important. What are you going to target first, and then move on to the additional needs too. So I think that's just a thing. Sometimes we look too broad and say, well, we got to
list every single one of their needs
everything,
all the time.
yeah.
Let's list them all.
But really, what's the hierarchy of most important needs to address first?
Yeah.
That's going to make the biggest impact.
Because at some point you only have so many SDI compliance minutes that you're able to operate on a caseload,
Yep.
and then we're writing compliance minutes for kids that we're never able to meet or execute.
Yep.
To me, it's almost the better decision as an IEP team to put that in the PR1 or note that on the profile of the IEP. Because of this is what we're going to address first. The IEP team is going to reconvene at this date to reevaluate that and amend the IEP to add some additional goals as needed. But if you're spending most of your day on the behavior, you can't get them to sit down and do the 90 minutes of reading for the week, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, not that we don't want to teach them to read and all those things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying is that we have to, I think sometimes we overstress the IEP with things that aren't priorities for the kid at the time.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, when I was working at a separate facility and I was getting IEPs from, I don't know how many different districts, so many different districts in our area. And you talk about, again, even within the same state, within the same county, we were getting IEPs, and everybody's looks different. Everybody writes them different. Every district has them feeling a little bit different. And, some of the IEPs we'd get in, it'd be like they have a math goal that could almost be as generic as like student needs to do better at 5th grade math or at 8th grade math. And I'd be like, okay. And then it would have like 7 objectives, and it's all it's like an addition objective, a subtraction objective, a multiplication objective, a division objective, how to figure out time, and I'm like, when
What are you doing?
Like, all I'm doing is tracking like this one kid's math, and then there would be like 3 other goals for writing would be the same way, the reading would be the same way, and you're thinking they're at a school for they're at a school potentially because of their behavior. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, how to consolidate and really hone in on. Obviously, stuff has to be compliant. Obviously, stuff has to be done the way it's supposed to be done within the district or within the state. But I think there's also, like you brought up, like what's best practice and what just even beyond that, like just what makes sense for this kid. Mm-hmm. So there's the aspect of doing it the way that it has to be done, and that obviously exists. But then there's also the part of it that's like, well, what actually makes sense too? Mm-hmm. Like those two things shouldn't be at odds with each other, actually. And I think sometimes we feel like they should be at odds with each other, like one can't coexist with the other. I actually think they can. I think you have to really just be able to understand and explain the why behind what you're doing. Like, this is how it has to be for this kid right now. Mm-hmm. And Katie, to your point, like maybe in 6 months we find out it doesn't have to be this way anymore. We actually can really go at this reading goal a lot more. We can add some stuff in that the student's capable of it now, the team's capable of it now. Let's go ahead and do that. We can amend stuff and add stuff in to make it a little bit more academically, I guess, rigorous, if that's how you want to say it. But I think that it's so many times it's like you swing so far in like the idea of like we've got to cover everything, and then everybody's just stressed out, including the kid who you're somehow trying to get all these data points on for 17 different objectives, and you're thinking, what in the world am I even doing here?
Yeah, as a follow-up, like my last point was just under prioritizing academic testing performance, and I think this is something, Justin, you do very, very well. I think taking those baseline, we use MAP in our district, whether it's Ohio State test or whatever your norm reference testing is. Sometimes there's not a priority of making sure we get accurate skills in there, because when we don't get accurate skills, we're just like, well, they got it done. I just wanted to get it done. Well, now you just added a bunch of IEP goals or educational needs for them when maybe they actually don't exist. Maybe tier 1 is enough for them, but because we don't have them perform well on some of these tests, it does make us go back to adding more intervention, because that's what the data is telling us, but maybe we're not getting accurate data testing. So I'll maybe let you follow up on that, but it really keeps them in tier 1 and reduces the need for so much additional SDI.
And I'll say with that too, because I know in my current district and your all's district, MAP is done 3 times a year, right? That's not enough data points it should be a data point. Yeah. But it's very important for IEP teams to look at classroom-based assessments. Yep. How are they doing? How are they performing in the curriculum? Those are the assessments. And even if it is like a screener type assessment or a progress monitoring assessment, there's tools where we're getting data every week, every 2 weeks. That's a norm referenced assessment. Use that as a piece of it. And we can use that MAP data or that triannual data. We can absolutely use it, but it should not be the only place.
So academic placements. Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree with you. It should be a combination of data points.
Correct.
I'm going to start saying triannual more.
I
like that. That was a good one.
But does that mean every 3 years or 3 times?
Which one does it mean? I never know. I never know.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. I agree.
But what I meant was 3 times a year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that's missed when it comes to behavior. Students with really tough behavior. I think that's one of the biggest things missed, Katie, is like the willingness to try to get the best out of them. That sounds bad because it makes it sound like people aren't trying to get the best out of them. I think that it comes out of a place of all of a sudden the testing, if you're working with a student with really tough behavior, the testing doesn't seem like the biggest fish you got to fry, right? Mm-hmm. Which I understand. I mean, it usually isn't.
We know it's not their best, and then that's our
and it's a cop-out, at times. We're like to say, well, they didn't try their best, and really they can do all these other things looking at the other data points, which isn't bad, but I also think what it does is, again, that kid moves, that kid goes on to another teacher or whatever. Somebody might just look at the testing data point and lock into that and be like, actually, this is how low they are. I think it goes back to it really, like the amount of relationship you build and how much you can explain why it's important for that kid to give their all in something like that. For the tests that we have the, some tests it's a one and done. You got one shot. right? Think about state testing. You got one shot.
pass
And so
it.
you start it and you're just going. So you got to do what you can
And
in the front end.
You can't pause it. You're
You're
one day.
in.
Yeah.
And so, you know, sometimes you have to give it your best, trying to get that kid in the best spot possible. And then you start it, and, you know, nature has to take its course, I guess. Some tests, like you've got other things that you can do, or you can maybe retest some of the district things that you can do, right? And there have been plenty of times that I've had to do that, where I've told kids on the front end, hey, listen, like we're not going to rush through. I actually want you to take your time. You know, maybe you take breaks, whatever. But let me know. I do want you to know on the front end, like if it seems like you just blow through this thing and you aren't giving it your best, I don't need you to get everything right. I just need to know what you are capable of. If I'm not thinking that I'm getting what you're capable of, we are actually going to test again. You know, we're going to do it again. And as I've had some kids experience that, and I'm like, I hate it. I don't want to make you test again. You hate it. You don't want to do the test again. Like, let's just all avoid it. Like, and I've had probably a good handful that are on my caseload right now who've had to do that before, and they've only had to do it before once,
Yep.
and then they're like, I will give my best effort, like moving forward, not in like a jerky way. It's not in a jerky way, but I always am explaining it like, I'm gonna have to sit down with people and explain why your score is what it is.
Please don't make me talk to Katie.
Like, it's just so then what you also get is you end up getting a much clearer picture of what the kid's capable of, and then I can sit in a meeting and say, I actually think this is a good representation. So that means this is what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
And I think that's valuable. And it's valuable for parents to be able to see. A lot of times you get like the higher scores that they've ever gotten once you get them to that place and they understand it. And that's also super encouraging to the gen ed teachers who are seeing it. They're like, oh, like actually they're capable of what I'm saying, and what I'm teaching every day is sinking in some way.
Yeah.
You know, it is making a difference. There's just a lot of value in it all around. Parents are happier, not just because it's a high test score, but because they can see maybe the most accurate score they've ever seen. And they then have information that they feel like is accurate, instead of sitting in a meeting and being like, their score was god awful, but don't worry, I don't think that's accurate. That's only so comforting, right? As a parent, it's much more comforting as a parent to be like,
so were the last
this is where we are.
yeah.
Yeah, this is where we think they actually are. So I think that's just that's an important thing, and it's a hard one to do when you have students with tough behavior. But I think it's important to get good, accurate information on some of those testing points.
Yeah. I agree.
All right, so how can we, as we're kind of wrapping up here shortly, how can we kind of best serve students in as a holistic team?
I think as much as we can streamline goals, I'm a big fan of co-serving on goals. If we're working on a behavior goal that's focused on regulation, then our occupational therapist needs to be co-serving that goal or consulting on it. They're supposed to be the regulation expert. We're talking about
as opposed to maybe them having a separate OT goal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. To me, as much as we can, it's like when you talk about like ABA therapy, it's the discrete trial training and then it's the natural environment teaching, right? There's some discrete trial training that's happening, maybe with the OT. And then you're doing the intervention specialist job is to do the natural environment teaching.
Yeah.
They both have to coexist for mastery of skill. And so sometimes I see a lot of the therapy goals being disconnected from the classroom teacher, when really they should be synced up in unison. Kids with communication services and delays, those should be somewhat, for social pragmatics, explicitly taught, right, with the expert, which would be your speech therapist. And then our job is to tag into that IEP goal and transfer it over to natural environment teaching. So I think we can think about kids more holistically and really prioritize their needs, because that's when we're going to see the shift in the neuropathways and actually see more progress. Is when our team is stepping in unison instead of working on a bunch of different things, going in silos in different directions. And then we don't actually even know what's happening over there because I've never seen them go to the therapist or go see the team, or the therapist has never seen them over here. So then we're actually just operating in like very silo context of what we think the kids' ability levels are, and then we're not transferring any of those skills over. So,
yeah, I mean, I think for me, like as my role as a coordinator, obviously compliance is a big piece. We want to make sure we're not getting dinged by the state, but I think that you can do minimally compliant, right? We're doing everything we need to, but making sure that we're adding as much detail that's not convoluted. It's very concentrated, and it's going to be helpful for the teams that are going to be receiving the students or working with the students. but providing as much current data or current strategies to provide for the team that look at the student from the time they enter the building till the time they leave. Whether it's in the cafeteria, whether it's walking in the hallways, using the restroom, however, painting a picture of what their day looks like and making sure it's current. And I do think it's important, we brought it up, but making sure that it is parent friendly and that your parent should know what their student's day looks like.
And hopefully you're coaching them through on how to do some of these things at home.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
The more we can be consistently on the same page works.
Right. Yeah, because absolutely, it's going to make your job as a teacher easier.
Yeah.
It's going to make your job as a parent easier.
They're a part of the IEP team, so they also give input, and they are a very important part of the IEP team that sometimes gets missed.
And I think I was thinking about it as we go through, like we as a intervention specialist, special education teacher, or therapist, like these are all things that we're bringing to the table. But at the end of the day, we have to all agree upon these things before we're not. The district isn't forcing what that education looks like for the student for the next year of that IEP. It should be collaborative. Yes, you have certain things that you have to do because the state tells you to, but ultimately nothing's finalized until after that meeting and parents are involved.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that Justin has said that is kind of stuck with me is we're joining their team for the year.
Yeah, I love that.
So when you have, especially you talk about kids with complex behavioral or disabilities needs, then parents are with them for their life.
Ever.
It's not the exit at 18 and good luck in the world. I mean, they're caring for them forever. So how can we best service and support them? The last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to let Justin talk, but I think so. Make sure your math is mathin' on your IEP too. I don't know how many times I'm like, I don't even know how that'd be possible.
Yeah.
Sometimes the trials and the percentage and just double check and make sure that mathematically is an option. Yeah. Sometimes I think we get caught up with a lot of math on there that doesn't always end up making sense.
Yeah, good test for an IS is like if you give this to somebody in Nevada, are they going to be able to understand what that goal is?
I don't know about Nevada. Yeah. I don't know if they will.
Or if you're in Nevada, are you giving that? Could you give it to somebody in Oklahoma?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do we want people to walk away with knowing from this episode?
I would say, as you're writing, IEPs it's tricky because they're personalized. It depends who your administrator is on how they want them or who your district is. It has changed every time I've changed leadership at central office in that department. It has changed as a teacher, depending on who my coordinator was. It changed based upon my team members, what type of IS I was. I've been a different type of IS before other than just a unit-based teacher. So reach out to your veteran teachers. Are a great person to lean into as you're writing IEPs. They've got lots of experience. And then look at your district level leadership for additional guidance that please don't say Katie and Justin and Josh said. But hopefully give you something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you can say that, and then they'll be like, "Who are they?"
Yeah.
Be like, you should check out this podcast.
And then make
it's a great segue.
5-star review.
Yeah.
I think for me too, I think when we look at goals and objectives, and once again speaking from being in Ohio, they have to be grade level. Based on grade level standards, so they have to be needs identified in the evaluation. So there is a finite amount of options that you have for writing goals and for writing objectives. So where I think that it becomes even more individualized is how you're scaffolding those goals based on the student needs, but then also how you're painting the picture of the student, the learning profile, as looking at the student holistically. In that profile or wherever in your state that you are able to capture really what it is to be with that student from the beginning of the school day to the end of the school day, and being detailed and what is most current. Because if you wrote that IEP in June or May of 4th grade and it's February of 5th grade, is it still relevant what's on the IEP? And hopefully things have changed. Maybe student needs have changed. Your strategies, the things that you're supporting the student with have changed. So make sure it's up to date.
Hopefully they've mastered the whole thing because you wrote that IEP so tight. And then you're just amending it at this point. Yep. Yeah.
Yep. So I would say just, yeah, I mean, I think that's where you can really paint the picture and use data as your decision maker.
Yeah. I think for me, I would just say, just be careful that it doesn't seem like all of your IEPs are so normally compliant that you could take 6 of them that you've written and read through the whole thing and be like, really, if I just interchange these names and the data points, I couldn't tell that it was a different kid at all. Like the data points are different and individualized to them. The name is different, but so much of the stuff is the same. And I feel like, make sure that, to kind of do your guys' points, like you find the places that you can describe what it's actually like to be with that kid and explain what things are working, what strategies are effective, what things maybe aren't worth trying again, because we've done that plenty of times and that's not the best way with this kid. Find the ways to be able to do that and really describe what it's like in those ways, because there are plenty of spots in the IEP where it is going to seem compliant, data-driven, the same as all of the other ones. There's a lot of spots where it kind of gets like that. Make sure you're taking the time to find the spots where it shouldn't be like that and make them be very, very personalized and really paint that picture of who the kid is.
Nothing worse or embarrassing is when you're sitting in an IEP meeting and it's not the kid's name in the IEP.
Oh my gosh, yeah, what in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah, as a coordinator.
You're like, well, that's not Josh's IEP, so we're going to take his name out.
Yeah. So hopefully you were able to, gauge how mad and or not mad Katie was. Hopefully Katie has a pretty good idea of how mad or not mad she was throughout the course of this one. We'll find out after we hit stop on the recording.
Or how well you knew to stay the course.
Yeah, or how well I stayed the course. I am not 100% sure what you thought was going to happen during this episode, but I think we were fine the whole time.
Okay.
But hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it just gave you food for thought to maybe go back and look at your IEPs. Maybe you've been an IS writing them forever. Maybe you've been a gen ed teacher reading them forever. And there's something that we said that sparked you, made you think, hey, maybe I should go back and look at these a little bit of a different way. Mm-hmm. Maybe I should start thinking about these a little bit of a different way. But if there wasn't, I think it's worth sharing the episode. Maybe have it as a point of conversation. Maybe it's an easy way as a coordinator to have your ISs listen to it and then discuss how you guys are doing IEPs and how we're wrong about the things that some of the stuff we said. Whatever way you want to use it, I think it's a valuable conversation to be having plenty of times about IEPs and how we are writing them and what their purpose is and all of that. As always, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you share it. And hopefully it was enjoyable along the way. You laughed a little bit. Let's all go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.